So now you are in the hometown of Victoria Marinova. Can you just tell us, what's the general mood there?
Good morning, Isabel. Well, there has been a huge outcry in the country, just as in the town of Rusa, because of the murder. So that's why hundreds are expected to the funeral, or more exactly to say, to the memorial service of Ms. Marinova, which is to be held in the Church of the Holy Trinity right behind me. After the memorial service, there'll be a funeral, though there is no schedule announced for the funeral. We think that the family and the colleagues might want to have the funeral itself to be more private. Now, there's not only grief, but also big tensions in Rusa because of the suspect, who is a Bulgarian citizen of Roma, maybe Turk, Kurdish origin. Living here in Rusa before he fled to Germany. Now, many people say that locals want some kind of revenge on the community, and that community, that poor neighborhood where the suspect is from, they are terrified. They have fear of any kind of revenge which they might are about to suffer from the locals, Isabel.
The US State Department has denied there is a deal to free American pastor Andrew Brunson more than 2 years ago after he was first detained in Turkey. Escorted by police, Brunson had left the complex where he's been on house arrest since leaving prison in July and has made his way to court. He's facing terrorism charges following the failed coup attempt on President Erdogan in 2016. The case has ratcheted up tensions with the US ever since. If found guilty, Brunson could spend up to 35 years in a Turkish prison. Well, joining us live now from Izmir is Reuters journalist Emily Wither. Thanks so much for being with us, Emily. Well, we've heard that Washington has denied such a deal exists, but what can we expect today?
That's right. There's been a denial that there is some kind of deal. And I have to say that the feeling on the ground among people who are hopeful that Pastor Brunson will be released today is cautious optimism. I have to remind you that there was a deal that was reportedly struck a couple of months ago, and many people here believed that Andrew Brunson would be released, and he wasn't. Instead, he was moved to house arrest. So despite reports of this deal underway, people here are not feeling totally hopeful that things will necessarily go to plan. Andrew Brunson's lawyer has told us that today we will hear from 2 new secret witnesses. And he is saying that the secret witnesses, what they have to say is not relevant to the case because they are making accusations against Brunson during a time that he had actually been arrested. So the court will decide today whether to hear from these 2 secret witnesses. And we're just waiting now for court proceedings to start. As you mentioned there, Brunson has already entered.
So how much of a source of tension is this detainment between these 2 nations?
We just cannot understate how important this case has now become for Turkey-US relations. Just to give you a sense of how closely linked it is now to Turkey's economy, when those reports surfaced last night that there might be some kind of deal underway, the Turkish lira rose significantly, over 2%. So that's just how much the markets here are watching what's going to happen. Relations between Turkey and the US were already on a downward spiral, but this has now really become a focal point. It's led to a tit-for-tat trade war, and it's really contributed to a near economic crisis here in Turkey. And if there is some kind of deal underway, people say that it's closely linked to improvements in the economy here. And many people in Turkey will be watching closely to see if he is released and if tensions are eased and economic sanctions are eased here in the country.
And just briefly now, what more do we know about the charges against Brunson?
We know that that prosecutors say that Andrew Brunson has links to Kurdish militant groups and also that he has links to supporters of Fethullah Gulen. That's the cleric that Turkey accuses of being involved in the failed coup here in 2016. I was speaking to one of the people named in the indictment for reportedly having secret meetings with Andrew Brunson, and he says that the prosecution never even called to hear his testimony. So people here say that the accusations are baseless, but Turkey insists that this will be a decision for the judicial courts and has nothing to do with politics.
The astronaut Chris Hadfield, who once co-piloted the Soyuz rocket and was commander of the International Space Station, spoke to me about what happened. I began by asking him what it would have felt like to come crashing down to Earth during that emergency landing.
If you listen to the voices of the crew, especially Alexei, the commander, he doesn't sound terrified at all. In fact, he's calm, trained, matter of fact, dealing with the problem. And I think he did a wonderful job of safely getting his capsule back down onto the surface of the Earth. The number one concern is the crew okay? Number two, how about the crew up on the space station? And now, of course, try and figure out what went wrong with the rocket. We always crash down to Earth. That's how every flight ends. What's different about this one, Isabel, is that they were about 2 minutes and 45 seconds into launch. They were about 80 kilometers up above the Earth when they had the malfunction. Their capsule was separated from the rocket, and then they tumble and fall. They manually selected a ballistic mode, and then they start plummeting into the atmosphere. And you sort of fall a long way, and then the air gets thick. It's almost as if you threw a stone into a pond. It floats for a while, and then it hits the thickness of the water, and you're really decelerated. They would have felt somewhere in the order of 6 or 7 times their normal weight, maybe even a little more. So they'd be crushed. But that's how most space flights go. So they're ready for it. It's not what they wanted to happen. They'll be pretty angry and disappointed, that they didn't get to go to space today. But the important thing is that the automated systems worked well, the crew worked well, and everybody's safe. First, we have to figure out what went wrong. What was the problem with the rocket so that we can fix it and then trust another rocket and put a crew on top of it to try this again. That might be simple if we find out exactly what the problem was, and there'll be a commission doing that, but it could take a while. If you look after the Columbia accident in 2003 or Challenger in 1986, those took over 2 years to launch another space shuttle. This should go faster than that, but it still could be quite a while before we get the next crew to go. So the 3 people up on the space station, they're essentially marooned right now with no way for another crew to come up until we solve all these problems.